so much. Well done. Well done.
All right, let's start with politics.
Sure.
Okay, current events. Barack Obama, is he the next president of the United States?
You know, you'd never know this from reading the op-ed page of the New York Times, but we're not allowed to endorse candidates.
Okay.
Say you'd never know it reading some of the columns. So.
This is totally off the record.
Sure, nobody tell.
Yeah.
But let me simply say, I think he's going to be what I will say, a formidable candidate. And I tell you why. You know, every election's about something. You know, Carter was about Nixon's dishonesty. You know, Reagan was about Carter's weakness. You know, Clinton was about the post-Cold War enthusiasm for the post-Cold War world that George Bush didn't have. George Bush benefited, you know, from the whole Monica affair with Clinton, a kind of rectitude and dig. So what is the question I really start by asking? What is the it, you know, for this election? And what I believe the it is, and I believe this is what Obama has actually touched, is that Americans today understand our country is on the wrong track. In fact, polls show a remarkable statistic. 80% of Americans say our country is on the wrong track. And I believe what Obama is touching is something that is deep in the American soul today. And I call that a desire for nation building at home. Americans don't want to do nation building in Iraq anymore. They don't want to do nation building in Afghanistan anymore. They don't want to do nation building in, you know, the Arab-Israeli peace process anymore. They want to do nation building at home. And they understand that that project requires a leader who can bring us together. And I think Obama has touched that. Hillary Clinton did not understand that. And that's why this young man who came from nowhere was able to knock off Hillary and Bill Clinton, because he understood, I think, what is the deepest mood right now in America.
Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but you believe that George W. Bush was bad news for Israel during his presidency, and that's because he, I think I'm quoting you, put America in the unique position in the Middle East where it's not liked, not feared, and not respected. Yeah. And a weak America means a weaker Israel.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, you know, American Jews have come up to me, just stunned, I mean, out of nowhere, and said, what are we going to do about Obama? Like you're a member of the tribe. What are we going to do about Obama? And I kind of always look at them and say, look, as an American, first and foremost, I'm going to vote for the person, whether I decide it's Obama or McCain, who's going to make America strong. If your priority is voting on Israel and not America, I would urge you to follow me, because I think the greatest act of friendship and security for Israel is a strong America. If you don't have a strong America, you know, so I don't, you know, whether you're for McCain or Obama or whatever, there is an argument, as my friend Darren Miller said in that column, of loving Israel to death, you know, and where you feel that America has a very important role here, I've always felt, of being a reality principle, for all sides. And I feel that during the last 8 years, you know, this administration didn't play that role. And that's a very important role. And at the same time, obviously, we had other issues in the neighborhood. So me, Tom Friedman, I'm voting for the person I judge next November will make America strong.
Okay, and I see if you can relate to that. Can Barack Obama pull America out of the position, this unique position, how the United States looks in the Middle East? Or does he want to?
Right, it's a very good, and the second question almost is more interesting to me than the first, you know. The Middle East will come calling. It always does. And we are in the middle in Iraq. So no one who is the next president of the United States can afford to ignore the Middle East. Let's start there. One of the things that I've written about that bothered me about the debate between Obama and Hillary, to some extent with McCain, because Obama was asked early on, would you talk to people like Ahmadinejad? And he said, I'll talk to anyone, basically. And then he kind of started to backtrack, said, well, I didn't necessarily mean the top man, I meant maybe the middle guy, and it'd be preparations first, and scratch your ear like that, and just like, my point, and then Hillary said, no, I wouldn't talk to him. And I think they both had it wrong. I don't think the issue is talk or not talk. The issue is leverage or no leverage. If I have leverage, I will talk to anybody. If I don't have leverage, get some. Okay? So my rule of diplomacy is if you've got leverage, talk. Because the table is tilted like this.
Speak softly and carry a big stick.
How are you down there? Okay? If you don't have leverage, get some. All right? But, what worries me a little bit is when people, do I talk or not talk? That's not the issue. In the Middle East, people can smell, I grew up in Minnesota. In Minnesota, we have a state fair every summer. And at the Minnesota State Fair, when I was a little boy, I always used to go, there was a guy who could guess your weight. And if he guessed your weight within 5 pounds, he won. And if he didn't, you won a big doll, a big stuffed animal. I used to stand there, watch, how did he do it? In the Middle East, people can guess your leverage within an ounce, okay? They can tell who's got leverage and who doesn't from 100 paces. And this is about leverage. And I want a president who understands leverage. And, one of the things I covered Jimmy Baker and as Secretary of State, and Jim Baker did understand leverage. And, in the Middle East, sometimes, you have to start a meeting by taking the person's hand, smashing it with a hammer, and then we talk, because in this neighborhood, it's, oh, I'm so sorry, did I hurt you? I'm so sorry, have I got your attention now? But if you just sort of come and, maybe I spent too much time in Beirut, but this is a hockey game, and you don't come and play by the rules of touch football, okay? So that's, to me, what I'm looking for, in that person.
Okay, let's talk about leverage. What's the U.S. leverage on Iran?
I think the most important way to get leverage on Iran would be multiple dimensions. I'm not going to talk about use of force. That's a separate issue. I'm going to leave that out for a second. Unfortunately, we're in the predicament we're in with Iran, and I talk about this in my new book. Why does Ahmadinejad sit there and give announcements? We have a saying in English, and I don't know, people have to understand baseball, but we say of someone, he was born on third base and thinks he hit a triple. Okay, all right. So Ahmadinejad can be a big schwitzer when oil is $125 a barrel. Now, I have what I call the first rule of petropolitics, which I've done in my new book. And it basically goes like this. It argues that the price of oil and the pace of freedom operate in an inverse correlation. So the way I did this, I actually graphed the price of oil from 1975 to 2005. And if you graph the price of oil from 1975 to 2005, the annual average OPEC price, the graph looks like this. Okay, it looks like a V. Round numbers. $80 a barrel, $10 a barrel in the early 1990s, and then $80, now $120 a barrel in 2005. Then I went to Freedom House, and I got the Freedom House Freedom Index for 3 countries. Freedom House does an annual freedom index, tracking free and fair elections, NGOs started, women's groups, magazines and newspapers opened or closed. So they do a freedom index. And I got the freedom index for Nigeria, Venezuela, Russia, and Iran. And all I did was take that graph from 1975 to 2005 and lay it on the OPEC price graph. What does it look like? Looks like that. What does that tell you? It tells you that as the price of oil goes down, the pace of freedom goes up. in states that are dependent on oil. I was only focused on what I call petrolist states. As the price of oil goes up, the pace of freedom goes down. So you know this actually in real life. When oil was $20 a barrel, Iran elected Khatami, who called for a dialogue of civilization. When it was $70, they elected Ahmadinejad, who said the Holocaust is a myth. One thing I can promise you, at $20 a barrel, the Holocaust is not a myth, okay? At $30 a barrel, George Bush looked into Vladimir Putin's soul. George Bush looked into Vladimir Putin's soul and he saw a good man down there. You look into Putin's soul at $80 a barrel, you'll see Lukos, Izvestia, Pravda, Gazprom, the parliament, everything he swallowed courtesy of $100 a barrel. So the price of oil and the pace of freedom operate in an inverse correlation. Now, there's actually a really important strategic point here. I actually gave a lecture on this in Moscow at the U.S. Embassy. And I made the point, with all due respect to Ronald Reagan, people forget that in December 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the price of oil was $15 a barrel. Okay, it was Sheikh Ahmed Zaki Yamani who brought down the Soviet Union, basically, not Ronald Reagan. So I made that point. Actually, it was closer to $10 a barrel, so I made this point. And afterwards, I got down from the stage. Vladimir Mao, runs one of their best economic institutes. I said to Vladimir, I'm right? It was $10 a barrel oil that brought down the Soviet Union. He said, no, Tom, you're wrong. It was $80 a barrel oil, followed by $10 a barrel oil, that brought down the Soviet Union. Because what $80 a barrel oil did was sucker the Soviet state into extending itself into all these areas, subsidies and whatnot, and then when $10 barrel oil came, whammo. It had to pull out of so many areas, the whole system collapsed. Iran is in exactly that position. That if you could take oil from $120, they've got 12%, 15% unemployment there at $125 barrel oil. Imagine you bring it down just back to $40, $50. The impact would be enormous. That's how you get leverage. But that's a long-term project. In the short run, we have no short-term leverage on Iran other than a military solution.
Okay, let me go back to your quote about America strong and Israel strong. And you wrote also that nothing would imperil Israel more than an enfeebled, isolated America. Now tell me, Tom, isn't that exactly where America is today? In one of its most...
It's certainly in this part of the world, we don't have the allies we need, we don't have the standing we need, and we don't have the respect we need. And that can change, though. I've been thinking about one of the things I'm doing on this trip, so I'm going also to Egypt, is there's some interesting cross currents. We went through this period right after the Iraq War, where it looked like Iraq was going to be a success. Gaddafi called up, said, send Rotor-Rooter. I've got some nukes in my basement. Suddenly we got rid of his nukes. Syria got out of Lebanon. Egypt held elections. It looked like history was on our side. Then things reversed. The Samara bombing happened in Iraq. We started to sink into the mud there. The price of oil started to go up. Trends started to go against us. Now it seems to me we're at an interesting juncture. Syria and Israel are engaged in peace talks. The result of the latest political deal in Lebanon is not perfect for Hezbollah. Hamas has its problems in Lebanon. Mughniya had a terrible accident in Damascus. And so far Hezbollah has done nothing. According to the CIA, a nuclear project in Syria disappeared with no reaction. And so the pendulum may be coming back away. I believe 90% depends on Iraq. If we can, and Iraq, we had our best month in Iraq since the war started, in terms of American casualties. As Iraq goes, so goes America's standing. If we can, I don't want to say democracy, but if we can produce a decent outcome in Iraq, where we defeat Al-Qaeda in the heart of its world, that will tip this thing in a different direction. Now, the Israeli-Palestinian thing, that's a different story. It's on a different rhythm and a different set of problems. But if you're talking about America, I think the ball game is how Iraq ends.
And that's despite the fact that oil may be going to 200 now.
Well, we have to have, this is what my next book is about, if we don't have a radically new energy policy, we will have $200 barrel oil, and basically our ability to shape the world against the petro-dictators will be enormously...
Okay, before we go into energy, let's talk about your writing for a second. How much is it important to you as a columnist in the New York Times and as an American Jew, the strengths and the survival of Israel?
Well, you know, it has nothing to do with me being a columnist. It has to do with me being who I am.
Columnist in the Times.
Yeah, I mean, it's and who I am, and as a columnist, I'm allowed to be who I am. And so I am Tom Friedman. I went to Herzl camp. I lived on Kibbutz Hachotrim for all 3 summers of high school. I did my sophomore year at the Hebrew University. I grew up in a Zionist environment. I'm a believer, and not only in the state of Israel, but Israel's survival, existence, and flourishing is personally very important to me. How that comes out in my column, it comes out in different ways, which sometimes people understand, sometimes they don't. Because when you're an American Jew and you're writing for the New York Times and you have my biography, some American Jews think I'm writing for, you know, a Jewish newspaper. And so they have expectations of you that are unrealistic. But you know what? Fortunately, I've been doing this long enough, I'm kind of beyond that. And people don't, you know, relate to me. I think they kind of figured me out. I'm a big believer in a 2-state solution. I don't believe Israel will be at home unless the Palestinians are. Palestinians won't be home unless Israelis are. If you're a supporter of that, whether you're called King Abdullah, Bibi Netanyahu, or Prime Minister Olmert, you're my friend. And if you're an opponent of that, you're my enemy.
Okay, your audience has...
It's okay.
Your audience has changed dramatically in the last 5 years. That's because of the internet, the success of the New York Times on the net, and the fact that now almost everything is free on the New York Times website. Now, when you sit down today to write a column, who is the audience you're thinking about? Who is reading your column?
It's a good question, very good question, and it operates at 2 levels. I mean, you know, I always used to think of writing my column for my mom at the level of understanding. That is that if I'm writing about it, how can I explain this first to myself? And then the way my mom was a very educated woman, not that she was simple, but that she would understand whether I'm writing about the internet or Iraq or globalization or the economy. So I try to write a very user-friendly column. And I get criticized sometimes, oh, too many metaphors, your column, you know, this or that. I always say, you know, no reader has ever come up to me and said, that column was too funny. Okay, that column was too easy to read, you know. So I never really pay much attention to that, you know, because if your column isn't read, you know, it doesn't scale, and if it doesn't scale, what are you doing, you know, number one. But in terms of the audience, I am keenly aware, so I'm a local, because my column, like all the other columns, is syndicated to about 500 newspapers around the world. So I am actually a local columnist in Haaretz. I'm a local columnist in the Hyderabad Sunday Times. I'm a local columnist in the Netherlands newspaper, in Denver, in South America. So there's never one newspaper. I'm keenly aware, though, that I have a global audience, because I hear from people. The World is Flat sold 500,000 copies in China. So there's a lot of people there reading this stuff. I'm keenly aware of that. I'll tell you a funny story. We have the most emailed list of stories in the New York Times, and columnists, because of their nature, they tend to, you know, go toward the top, because it's usually, you know, look what Maureen Dowd said, look what Frank Rich said, you know, because they're opinions, so they have sometimes more energy. And I used to, God, this is about 10 years ago now. I was working Sundays. My column was appearing Sundays. And I often, before I'd go to bed, sometimes late Saturday night, I would check, you know, the column, just read it before, as it was going to appear the next morning. And I had written a column, this was in one of my anti-French moods, saying that India should replace France on the Security Council. I'm a famous Indiophile. And I was going to bed, I was reading the paper online, I see this column is already the number 5 most emailed column on the New York Times website. It's only been out for 2 hours. And then I realized, of course, it's morning in India. They're all reading it over there, saying, look at this, and emailing it all over. So you get funny reactions like that. But I just think of my audiences as being out there. But when I was in Beirut, just imagine, the paper, the New York Times, wouldn't come for 6 weeks. The physical New York Times. You could write whatever you wanted. By the time somebody here in the PLO came and said, did you see what, it was now. The story I always love to tell about this was, I was here, this is where I really got the first inkling of it. I was here as the New York Times correspondent. In 1985, there was an election. And the results were late at night, and they announced the cabinet list. And it was so late, I was at home, and I had to dictate the cabinet list. So I'm going down the list, Prime Minister, Shimon Peres or Shamir. We got to Minister of Religious Affairs. And I said, Minister of Religious Affairs, National Religious Party Leader, Yosef Burg. And for some reason, the person on the other end heard Bedouin Religious Party Leader, Yosef Burg. And the newspaper came out at 11 p.m. There was the cabinet list. Bedouin National Religious Party Leader, Yosef Burg. And it took at 11:05, someone called the New York Times and said it's not Bedouin, and it was corrected at 11:06. So you are really aware that you're being read by a lot of people, and you better get it right.
Okay, let's talk about business. That we're here to talk about how Israel can do the leap and become one of the most developed and rich countries in the world. As you know, we are not growing that fast enough. In the last 10 years, I think that GDP per capita in Israel grew at about 60% of what it grew in the OECD countries, and less
60% of the OECD
60%,
average.
yes, 40% less. And some people in Israel, to make it clear, I'm not one of them, but many people in Israel, maybe in this audience, believe that the path to that leap go through peace in the Middle East, or at least to a clear peace process. What is your take on it?
Well, I'm going to back into that, and not avoid it, but I want to back into it, because one of the things I talk about in the book is, because I get that question in every country. Okay, the world is flat. What do we have to do? And the answer actually is very simple. You got to get three things right, basically. The first is infrastructure. Okay, if you can't connect to the flat world platform, I'm talking about bandwidth, telecom, ports, airports. If you can't connect to the flat world platform, you're going to have enormous liability. So the first is roads, airports, classic infrastructure. The second is education. You have to have people with the right education, because it's all about who can collaborate on the platform. Do you have people who can be innovators and collaborators on the platform? And how many do you have? Do you have 3, or do you have a critical mass? And the third, of course, is governance. What are the rules of governance? Are they simple and clear, so the flow between you and the flat world will be as smooth as possible? And the World Bank has done a study of this, where they have a whole criteria. How many days does it take to get a license to open a company? How much money does it cost? How difficult is it to sue someone? How easy is it to go bankrupt? One of the most important things in a country is how easy it is to go bankrupt. Because the quicker and easier you can go bankrupt and unlock dead capital, the more quickly you can apply it. So you get your infrastructure, governance, and education right, you'll be fine. Now, part of those are management and leadership issues. Part are also resource issues. Infrastructure and education, they're about dollars and cents. If you have to pay money to protect settlements or to fight wars with Hezbollah, the pie is only so big. So peace does make a difference in terms of the application of resources.
Okay, Tom, you were a globetrotter. You probably don't remember when was the last time I met you. It was, I bumped into you, yes, it was an elevator in the Shangri-La Hotel in Dalian, China.
Was I nice? I hope I was nice.
You were very nice.
Great.
Tell us about the countries that you know through your visits that are doing the right thing, that have some similarities to Israel and we should learn from, and what exactly are they doing?
Well, I would say it's a very good question. To me, Israel is a country that is hardwired for globalization, for the flat world. Because you have the three things that, beyond the infrastructure, at the kind of personal level, that are keys to success. First of all, individualism. It's an individual's world. And when you have a society that is got a lot of solidarity, but also people are very easily able and willing to be contrarians, to challenge authority, to act individually, that's a huge asset. Secondly, an innovative culture. This is a culture that rewards and enables innovation. And the third is what I like to call a cyber tribe. Jews are a cyber tribe. You already have a global network. So when you have what I call a hot zone, which is innovative individuals, and a global cyber tribe, you're hardwired for globalization. One thing Israel doesn't have to teach is courses on innovation. You know, in Singapore, they have an hour. Okay, now we have an hour for creativity. You know, and you don't have to do that. You don't have to have an hour for creativity around here. You know, just get out of the way. But it isn't that simple, because you do need to. Not everyone can be a founder of ICQ, and not everyone can invent Google, and everyone down the line also needs to be enabled and empowered in their own way. And that's why education is so important. But I would much rather have Israel's problems, which are mostly financial, mostly about governance, and mostly about infrastructure, rather than Singapore's problem. Because Singapore's problem is culture-bound. That you question authority at home in Singapore, and sorry, you're going to get smacked down. So don't think you can have a home, a culture, where you never challenge your elders. And then in the classroom, people are going to stand up and say, teacher, you're all wrong. Okay? That doesn't happen. So I'd much rather have Israel's problems, which are really can be cured by money and better leadership, which I think are easier to come by than trying to create a culture of innovation.
But you know, Tom, when I read your book, I wasn't that thrilled from the flat world, because as you know, they are about what can Israel offer in a world where you have 500,000 Chinese and Indian engineers coming out every year, 500,000, and it's not only they are talented engineers, you have thousands and maybe tens of thousands of very motivated, smart, and hungry entrepreneurs there. So what can we offer the world?
It's a good question. First of all, the world thinks you can offer a lot, since last month was the first month that China got more venture capital than Israel. Last quarter, China got 700 million, Israel got 600 million. Let's see, 1.3 billion Chinese got 700 million. 6 million Jews got 600 million. So the market seems to think that this place can generate a lot of ideas. Okay,
that's why you're so optimistic, because we had that statistic in our newspaper, and the headline we chose was China gets more money than Israel for the first time. We did not mention the fact that population in China is bigger. We neglected to mention that.
Well, you know, Bill Gates said to me, you know, when I was interviewing him for the book, you always remember, in China, when you're 1 in a million, there are 1,300 other people just like you. Okay. So, but it's on a per capita basis, Israel is a powerhouse of innovation. And I think the challenge will be keeping it here, creating that environment where you're going to get some brain drain. That's inevitable. But creating that enabling environment where people want to stay here and create these ecosystems. But you ask a deeper, more important question, and I get it a lot in America, people ask. Because it gets to one of the misunderstandings. It's a simple economic principle. People think there's a lump of labor. There's a lump of labor. I've got it. And now, oh no, it's going to China. Now they've got the lump. And there's so many of them, I'll never be able to compete. It's actually not like that. The global economy, when the world gets flat, doesn't just get bigger. It also gets more complex at the same time. So the example I always like to give is, I say, Mom, Dad, one day your son or daughter come home from college, they say, Mom, Dad, I've decided. I want to be a search engine optimizer when I grow up. Your parents say, what are you talking about? You couldn't be a doctor, a lawyer, ophthalmologist. You got to be a search engine optimizer. What the hell is that? Okay. Your grandmother will be devastated. Okay. What is it? 10 years ago, there was no such thing as search. Suddenly search comes along. Suddenly people realize that if I'm ABC Widget Company and somebody puts in widgets in Google and I come up on page 1 on Google, not on page Gimel, the difference for me is enormous. So somebody said, what if we could create an industry that mashed up math and marketing, that created algorithms and marketing strategies to get ABC Widget Company from page Gimel to page Aleph. In fact, to the top of page Aleph. They created a whole new industry called search engine optimization. Didn't exist before. So suddenly someone who has good marketing skills and good algorithm abilities, or one or the other, and can mash them together, whole new industry. Google, holds an annual ball for the search engine optimizer industry, because they all come once a year to try to figure out Google's algorithm to game it so their companies can move up higher. So here's a whole, believe me, I never drank coffee growing up. I didn't even like coffee. Starbucks came along, I can't live without coffee. Okay? I can't live without Google now. So needs expand, niches expand. The global economy doesn't just get bigger, it gets more complex. The key is educating enough of your people to take one of those slices. And you never know where the slices are going to come from. The key, though, is making sure you're always pushing your people up the knowledge, so when somebody invents a new industry that takes math and marketing, you've got people who can dive into it.
Okay, let's go back to your last comment.
So be an optimist.
Okay. How many people in the audience are involved in some kind of SEO efforts? SEO efforts? Okay, young people. I thought that every Israeli teen is involved now in SEO, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe. Okay, so you mentioned earlier the network, the cyber network of the. If Forbes magazine editors don't want to look like anti-Semite, that's why they don't put up whether how many Jews are on their list. But if we know that there are many Jews over there and so on, Wall Street is probably dominated by the Jews, and so is maybe Silicon Valley. Do you think Israel is missing an opportunity to leverage that Jewish network? Or maybe how can we leverage that Jewish network?
I think there's a lot of it going on, but I think that certainly no reason you shouldn't, and where there are Jewish entrepreneurs who, either for business reasons or emotional reasons, want to be involved in helping Israel, I'd much rather see them write a check to a startup than to a charity. I hope they do both, but I'd much rather them, as they say, teach a person to fish, not feed a person to fish. And but at the same time, like I was up at Iskar, and they had 3 seminars going on. One must have been 50 business people from Czechoslovakia. It was all being done in Czech, okay, on learning about machine tools in one room, and another room were people from Sweden. And you want to be able to compete globally, with the best, and not depend on charity. What really excites me when I was having lunch today with Yossi Vardi, and he was telling me next week a French delegation is coming here to look at startups and innovation. The week after, it's German, and the week after maybe it's from China. I met the president of the Technion. President Apolog told me he was recently in China, and the curiosity about the Technion, he said, was enormous. I think that's the real strength, when you're competing head-to-head with the best. Guess you got a question.
Okay, let's go back to your energy comments. In an interview you gave at The Marker last month, you said you hope a barrel of crude oil would reach $200 because that will push forward the alternative energies. Well, are you really sure? Because it's probably going to take 10 years until we produce significant alternative energies, technologies, and resources, and by that time, many trillions of dollars will go from the Western world to countries that are not leading in democracy.
Sure. Well, what my next book is about is this, and did I mention I've got a book coming out?
Yes. We didn't mention your last book, that the world is flat.
No, and the whole theme of the book is that people say we need a Manhattan Project. I think we don't need a Manhattan Project. I think we need a market. And what we don't have today in energy is a real free market. And to have a real free market in energy, you need a price signal. I wish the price signal would come from the government raising a carbon tax or a gasoline tax. But unfortunately, especially with our economy, slipping these days, that's going to be very difficult. So the price signal is probably going to have to come from the market. And it will take a long time. This is a long-term problem to solve. And in the meantime, there's going to be a huge transfer of wealth. But what bothers me is that every time we come to these moments, we always say, oh, the public, we couldn't do that. So we never start the transition process. We keep postponing it. And therefore, the longer we postpone it, the bigger the pain is going to be. First, when oil was, the day 9/11 happened, oil in America, regular gasoline was $1.60 a gallon. I wrote a column the week after 9/11, let's have a patriot tax. $1 a gallon gasoline. It'll be $2.60 instead of $1.60. George Bush said no. He said everyone should go shopping. Okay. And then when it was $2.60, people said no, it's $2.60. Who could put a tax on $2.60? And then it went to $3 and now to $4. And each time we say, oh no, we couldn't do that. The pain would be too great. Well, eventually the market or Mother Nature is going to do it for us. And, politicians always tell you, you just can't do that. You just can't do it. And I always think, why can't you? Imagine you're in a campaign and the anti-tax candidate says, oh, now my opponent here, Mr. Friedman, he's for a gasoline tax. He's never seen a tax he didn't like. And now he wants a gasoline, $1 a gallon he wants to put on it. Another tax. What would I say? I'd say, well, let's get one thing straight. My opponent and I are both for a tax. I just have this quaint feeling that I like my taxes to go to the American Treasury, not the Saudi Treasury. Now, my opponent seems to be indifferent. He doesn't mind that our taxes go to the Saudi, Iranian, and Russian Treasury. It's just a personal tick I have. I like my taxes to go to the U.S. Treasury. If you can't win that argument, you don't belong in politics.
Okay, so there's not going to be a tax right now, right? No way. Okay, I have a lot of questions, but they told me that we have only 5 minutes, okay. So I'll move to the question I saved to the end, what I call the politically incorrect questions.
Please.
Okay. First question would be, what is your opinion regarding our Prime Minister Ehud Olmert?
I was born...
Op-ed, you said you can't write anything about the American president, but it doesn't contradict with the ethics of the New York Times, so you can...
So my answer is very simple. I was born at night, but it wasn't last night. I'll pass on that one.
Okay.
I don't know how you say that in Hebrew, but I have a feeling it sounds good.
Okay, so we'll dig more. What would happen to an American senior politician that got caught taking cash money, US dollars, in envelopes for campaign contributions and personal expenses like first-class tickets upgrades?
Obviously, I'm not going to answer that because since this case hasn't even been adjudicated, I think even the Prime Minister is entitled to his day in court. So I'm going to leave that.
Okay. How influential is the Jewish lobby in the White House today? In the White House, in the Congress, in the Capitol Hill?
Look, there's lobbying is a grand tradition in America, and the Jewish lobby is very influential. There's no question about it, but in a very narrow, deep way. That is, when the United States saw it as its vital and strategic interest to sell AWACS to Saudi Arabia, it overruled the Jewish lobby that opposed it. I think the Jewish lobby is at its most powerful, and only truly powerful, when what it is advocating is perceived as overlapping and in parallel and in sync with what is perceived at any given time as the overriding American national interest. But I wouldn't deny it. It's certainly the Jewish lobby is influential. So is the oil lobby, the coal lobby. We have the energy policy. We have, because these other lobbies are also important. But the Jewish lobby is I'm sure quite influential. I don't feel very up on it these days. One of the big changes in my life is that there's so few senators and congressmen now to really talk about foreign policy with. Republicans or Democrat. Boy, when I came to Washington, there was Moynihan and Sam Nunn and Paul Simon, and you could go around the whole Senate Foreign Relations and Armed Services Committee and find Steve Solars, people who not only were interested in the world, but who had traveled the world, gone out and seen it, really established their own point of view. And that is less and less true. And I'm not saying they're smarter or dumber, but people are less, there's just fewer people really absorbed and interested in foreign policy today. And that's not healthy, and especially at a time when newspapers like fortunately the New York Times, just think when I came to Beirut in 1979 as a reporter, we had the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Baltimore Sun, the Los Angeles Times, the Chicago Tribune, all CBS, ABC, NBC, all had reporters there. And that plurality of the multiplicity of reporters enriched the whole debate. ABC said this, CBS said that. Now, you go to, in Iraq, there's the New York Times, there's the Washington Post, there's the Wall Street Journal, but there's no more Baltimore Sun, there's no more Chicago, maybe Chicago Tribune has I'm sure they have but it's really shrunk.
So since you brought it up, I really want to get you in trouble. What do you think is going to happen to the New York Times? Will the Sulzberger sell?
Mr. Sulzberger, the publisher, has said he's never going to sell, he's not in to sell. But we are challenged by this, and it's obvious one need to only look at the stock price or the income earning of the New York Times right now. And I think this is a huge issue for democracy. I love the blogosphere, and I love the idea of all these voices out there. But the blogosphere has no one, covering Baghdad on a daily basis, in a way that can be condensed and edited and distributed the way a newspaper can. The blogosphere didn't break the story that the Washington Post did about the terrible conditions of hospitals at Walter Reed, or what the New York Times did about wiretapping. So they are complementary. Howie Kurtz, who's the media writer for the Washington Post, told me a story. He was up at Harvard recently, said, and talking to a group of journalism students, and one of them said, I get all my news from YouTube. What are you going to do about that? And Howie said, I answered him, what are you going to do about that? You cannot have a healthy democracy in America or Israel without a healthy press. A press, that has edited news. The blogosphere is a wonderful complement for it. But I would not want to get my news from YouTube every morning.
And when you see Rupert Murdoch buying the Wall Street Journal, what does it say to you?
I'm glad he's investing in newspapers, and I hope, competition.
But he's a different kind of publisher than Sulzberger.
That's okay. The market will decide that, and I'm all for that. Competition is really healthy. One reason America got a little less serious in the last 20 years, we lost our competitor, the Soviet Union. And when you lose your competitor, you're not as serious. And we will be a better newspaper for Rupert Murdoch investing in the Wall Street Journal.
So why does he keep saying all the time that he wants to kill the New York Times?
My publisher doesn't say, I want to kill him back, but I bet in private, they say, we're going to kill him, okay? I think newspapers all about competition. I started at UPI in London, and every morning I wanted to kill the AP. If there had been no AP, I'd have definitely got out of bed an hour later. And when there's no Soviet Union, we in America, we get out of bed an hour later.
All right, so are you still optimistic?
I'm always an optimist. It comes from growing up in Minnesota. growing up in a progressive place in a wonderful home, and I really live by the motto that pessimists are usually right. Optimists are usually wrong. But all the great change in history and all the great new companies were done by optimists.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We enjoyed so much this hour we got from you, the hour you gained in Baltimore. Thank you. אנחנו רק לסיים את היום המופלא והמדהים הזה. אני רוצה להזמין עוד ענק, שני ענקים שיושבים כאן, את גידי גרינשטיין. בבקשה.
We'd like to conclude. אנחנו רוצים לסיים בזה שנאמר תודה. Tom, in a minute we'll say your thank you in English, but first we'll say a few thank yous in Hebrew. אז קודם כל, כפי שאמרתי, הכנס הזה הוא אבן דרך במסע שנמשך כבר 11 שנים וימשך עוד הרבה שנים קדימה. אנחנו כאמור מחויבים לו ונמשיך לשרת אותו. אנחנו נפעמים שוב ושוב מהתגובות שאנחנו מקבלים ברשויות המקומיות, בממשלה, במגזר הלא ממשלתי, קרב ערבים ויהודים בישראל ובחול. לכן אנחנו מרגישים את תחושת השליחות הזו שמגיעה במידה רבה מהאנרגיה שאנחנו שואבים מקהלים כאלה. החזון הזה הוא לא, החזון של ישראל 15 הוא לא רק החזון של מכון רות, הוא גם לא רק החזון של ראיה שטראוס או יעקב נאמן, הוא גם לא רק החזון של אנשים ופוליטיקאים כמו ביבי נתניהו או אבישי ברוורמן, הוא לא רק החזון של צוות שהכין את ישראל 2028 בראשות דוד ברודד ואלי הורוביץ, הוא החזון של כל אחד ואחת מהאנשים שנמצאים כאן, שבחרו להקדיש את השעות האלה כדי להרחיב את הדעת ואולי לקחת על עצמם איזושהי מחויבות. לפני שאנחנו נפרדים איתו, אני רוצה לומר תודה לכל האנשים שהפכו את החוויה כאן על פני 3 חודשים של עבודה מאומצת מתוכנית ורעיון למציאות שאתם כולכם חוויתם. ראשית לכל המשתתפים, אני כמובן לא אמנה את כולם, מהרשויות המקומיות, אנשי עמותות, יזמים חברתיים, קרנות פילנתרופיות, מנהיגי העולם העסקי, מנהיגים מהעולם העסקי שנמצאים כאן, נציגי הממשלה, העולם היהודי. הדבר הנוסף, ואני רוצה להודות לשותפים שלנו, השמות שלהם הופיעו כאן, אז אני לא אלאה אתכם, אולי אפשר להריץ את השמות, בזה שאני אקרא את שמם. לכל נותני החסות, השמות מופיעים בפולדרים, לחברת אורסקר ולאורלי שני ולכל הצוות, לשלום תל אביב, לזמיר דחבש ולצוות שלו, לענת קראוס ולצוות שלה. 3 הקבוצות האלה הפכו את היום הזה, 3, קבוצה אחת, 3. חוץ מזה, לצוות של מלון דיוויד אינטרקונטיננטל שבאמת עשו מעל ומעבר, משום שהאירוע הזה יותר מהכפיל את עצמו בשבוע האחרון. לצוות של מכון רעות שממש עשה ימים כלילות כדי לגרום לחוויה הזו להתממש, ובראש ובראשונה למירב פיק, לנטלי אופיר, למאיה יעקובס ולעומרי דגן. אני רוצה להודות לארז מלצר שהיה יושב ראש הכנס וגם כן הקדיש שעות רבות מאוד, לראיה שטראוס, ואחרון חביב לתום פרידמן. תום. ואת השלב הבא ברשותכם, את הדקה הבאה באנגלית. We were wondering what we should give you as a token of gratitude and appreciation, because not everybody knows that Tom has donated his time, graciously donated his time. So we were thinking what we should get you. And obviously we don't have the money to buy you something that you don't have. I just heard that you sold 500,000 books in China alone. I hope all of them were legal copies. Anyway, so we decided to go, instead of, you were publishing Flat World 3.0, after Flat World 2.0, after Flat World 1.0, we decided to go to World 0.0. And to give you, as a person who really believes in green, and you coined the term, I believe, green is the new red, white, and blue, which stands for national security in America. We decided to give you the most basic gift that we could give you, to plant 10 trees in your name. So I'll hand it over to you. And I just want to say that,
Best gift you could give.
Thank you. And I just want to say that from a very short acquaintance with Tom, as you have seen tonight, you can all see that he truly believes in the spirit of mankind, in democracy, free market, basic humanistic values. He loves people. He loves spending time with people. He's a listener. He loves stories. He's curious. He learns from everyone. And he doesn't only settle for describing the world that he experiences. He actually is trying to affect the world through his ideas and concepts and the books that he writes. But no less than that, and I believe all of us have been touched by it, it's obvious that Tom is a big, big believer in the state of Israel. You said so yourself, in its future. He believes in the tremendous power of imagination and creativity that we, Israelis, people in this room, we have. He believes in us. And that's why I'm very, very grateful. Tom, thank you very much. And last but not least, I want to thank Guy Olnick for taking the time and getting the best out of Tom. Thank you very much.
לא שמעת? אורלי, שני.